If we're just wanting everyone to come back to the table, we'll get Dave to come up to present to this item. Kia ora, everyone. So just to clarify, you've seen this on your tables. Obviously, there's been a lot of feedback from local boards, asked for advice yesterday from Dave to help put together, together for option 3. Dave will still present why option 4 on this. He'll go through the presentation why they've chosen option 4 and the ins and outs of that, but I've been clear that I think the local board direction, and I think for most around here, is option 3, but also talking about what it means, such as areas like kina and oysters, which currently have a daily person limit of like 150, why those could be carved out of that and the issues, but not trying to make it so complicated under option 4, in my opinion. But anyway, we'll let Dave take off. We can ask questions based on why it's option 4 in the proposal, but Councillor Short is keen to second the motion, and then we can ask questions on that as well. So, thank you.
Good afternoon again. For this particular item, Dave Allen, Manager Natural Environment Strategy from the Policy Department, and today we're looking to provide you this proposed submission to Fisheries New Zealand in response to their review of measures for shore-based recreational shellfish harvesting. And we'll just see if we can get this clicker to work. There we go. Thank you. The key point to take away here is that the review is focused on the recreational shellfish harvesting activity from hard shores. This has been an item that's been quite topical for many years, and staff have been advocating with Fisheries New Zealand to have this review for several years. And it was included within the management plan for the Hauraki Gulf, but at the time we made it very clear that it speaks to the whole region, and we've been using this opportunity to sort of prioritise the regional response. The review focuses largely on the species that don't have individual bag limits, and so these are species that have been harvested to a maximum combined limit of 50 per person for all other shellfish species, and that includes things like periwinkles, crabs, limpets, whelks, starfish on the reef, and then this is also not intended to restrict the harvest of some of the individual species that have harvest limits like kokopipi, tuatua, kina, oysters, and things like that. So that is the problem definition that Fisheries New Zealand have articulated in their discussion document in early May. This is the Auckland Coromandel area, which was defined in the late 1990s. At the time, we were looking at lowering bag limits for some of the more commonly taken shellfish. And this is the area we came up with at the time when I was working with Fisheries New Zealand. And this is the area that represents a lot of the area that recreational harvest was occurring in. And it effectively covers both west and east coasts across to the Coromandel. So this is a fairly broad geographic area that has many different features in terms of what shellfish is found where. And the intent for this particular presentation is to just note the outer bounds of the Auckland Coromandel area, and then also to you've got the intertidal closure area or the defined closed area, which is the little orange strip around the mainland across the broader area and including Waiheke Island. So the rationale for change, let's get back one.
Do you want to go back a slide?
Can you do that, please? Thank you. The rationale for change is to basically firstly look at the purpose of the Fisheries Act, which is to provide for use while ensuring sustainability. It's a piece of legislation that applies generally across the country, and of course it caters for managing recreational, commercial, customary Maori interests in terms of their use of fishery resources around the country. The recreational daily bag limit for all other shellfish was introduced in 1993, and I was part of that piece of work at the time. And that recognised that there was considerable concern about a number of people harvesting these previously unregulated category of species, these all other shellfish category. Since that time, there's been obviously significant changes in land use, and the population has increased significantly since the mid-1980s, about double. And we've seen a lot of temporary closures and other management approaches applied by Fisheries New Zealand and the community to address local issues across the region. But there's been no prioritisation of a broader-based review, which is going to be more efficient and effective to address some of the fundamental needs that are required. And so that's the basis for the change proposal right now. So if I could have some assistance with the slides again, please. So the management options proposed is to firstly look at the bag limit or the daily limit of 50 per person, and what's proposed here is to reduce that bag limit from 50 down to 10 for all other species. This will ensure that the level of harvest that is witnessed is significantly reduced in a lot of these accessible coastal areas, whether west or east coast, and across through to the Coromandel, where this is also an issue. There will also be some opportunity for some people to collect that level of shellfish outside of the closed defined area, and that's where that bag limit will apply. But within the closed defined area, there will be some further restrictions here, which are quite significant to effectively prohibit most shellfish take. So what the intention is to look at is how well that defined closed area restriction is basically put in place to ensure that the hardshore species of shellfish are addressed in terms of ongoing sustainability. So the thank you. So the council submission is supporting the reduction of the daily limit from 50 to 10 for all other shellfish species. There are some newly proposed daily limits that are actually proposed for about 5 identifiable shellfish groups, which are also a useful addition to have something a bit more specific for those species. And the intent, again, to restrict significantly the harvest of shellfish species is supported, particularly in the hard shore environment, which is the basis of the problem definition. The issue here is about how you then look at the restrictions that you might wish to put in place for the defined closed area. The defined closed area includes all the coastal areas, not just rocky areas. So effectively you'll be looking to encompass some of the restriction or prohibition across the species with individual daily limits, whether they're things like rock lobster, paua, oysters or kina. It would also be capturing shellfish which are found in soft shore environments, so that's sandy environments like kokopipi, tuatua and scallops. A lot of those species already have specific management measures in place. There's minimum legal sizes. There is scallops that are closed on the east coast and the Kaipara. There are, for rock lobster, an inner Hauraki Gulf closure from Cape Colville across west to Cape Rodney. Really, there's a number of temporary closures for cockle, pipi and tuatua that are also in place in some areas. So there are quite bespoke measures for those individual species because they've always had a level of popularity about them, and it's been resolved over many years. So if you were to look at what species are then actually prohibited, it's basically obviously all those other species in the all other category, and that's hundreds of species that would be affected. That actually is targeted to the problem definition in terms of mainly the hardshore species where that collection activity has been of concern. So as was indicated in the report, option 4 does list some exceptions, and what we've attempted to do as staff is to narrow the number of exceptions down a bit more so that you've got an option that the committee can endorse, which is closer to option 3 with potentially just 1 or 2 exemptions. And so we've highlighted the fact that exemptions should be in place with things like the existing individual daily limit species or some of the other species that are found in soft shore environments. So the list of exceptions is relatively short, but actually outside of the area where the hard shore concerns are generally found. The only real exception on the hard shore would be for oysters and kina, which are basically something that is abundant enough to enable some level of harvest. So that is the nature of where we've landed, and of course we've got some recommendations that the chair has helped to pull up to try and indicate where we're going with this. But there's, I think, some sort of consensus around, trying to follow the intent of the full prohibition with just 1 or 2 abstentions applicable to some species that are otherwise catered for by other means in terms of individual bag limits or such things. So I'll leave it there.
Cool, thank you very much. It's a complex issue, but an important one. Now, I don't have any questions yet, but I know there will be some. Member Blair.
Kia ora tātou. Can't remember what year the Waikato pipeline tap was turned on, but at the ceremony my job was to go and take down at least 3 buckets of toheroa as a koha to the Waikato people for allowing us access to their river water. I drove from Muriwai up to the mouth of the harbour and back, and I found one, and it was this big, and it tasted really good, because I couldn't take one. There were no toheroa that we could take, and many of you, I'm sure you've seen the photos from the 60s with cars of Pākehā opening up their boots and filling their cars full of all of our shellfish, to the extent now we have very few left. So we tautoko this, and someone, I think, Chair, you said it was complex. Could we make it more simple instead of 50 to 10, and then our poor kaitiaki and fisheries officers having arguments and debates over whether it's 11 or 12, but I've got my kid in the car and cousin was on the boat and all of that, that we actually close it all for a time so that there's 0 take, to make things a bit clearer. I wonder if that had been considered at all.
So that's partly why we've got further restrictions for the defined closed area, because that's where a lot of the accessible places are to go and harvest, as opposed to outside of the defined closed area, but within the Auckland Coromandel area, where there is a lot of remote places where fishing can still continue at that reduced rate. And so it's really just a case of, if you're in the mainland area in Waiheke at the moment, in terms of the proposal, then you are generally prohibited from collecting those all other unspecified species. Beyond that, you can collect those species in the wider geographic area. Of course, those species are not the species that were the popular species that you were referring to, like Taurua in the past and maybe now in terms of cockle and pipi. And so those are species, of course, that there has been individual bag limits that have been in place that have been reduced over time. Back in 98, 99, there was reduction in some of the bag limits for those species. And so what the Fisheries New Zealand and Mana Whenua, I think, are probably of the view that some of the limits for those have been reviewed and are set appropriately, and in fact they've been applying rahui and other tools as appropriate for some of the beds where applicable. So I think there's a range of complementary measures that need to be considered here. I think that's still possible.
But just checking on the question, the option 3 that we've put forward goes far closer to that, but you might still have, say, kina and oysters because they're so abundant, and without take of, say, kina by the shore, that will start taking off again because at the moment the numbers are, 150 a person a day or something?
Yes, so the individual bag limit species, things like kina and oysters, and then there's the soft shore species, which I sort of mentioned, which are not really part of the problem definition. But if you're thinking about just the hard shores, then you're really looking at things like, apart from oysters and kina, you're looking at things like paua, which has a minimum legal size, which doesn't really, the paua doesn't grow that big in these warmer waters up north here, apart from a few locations. And rock lobster, and in the case of rock lobster, you've got a inner Hauraki Gulf closure across from Rodney to Colville anyway, so there's a number of other restrictions that are already in place to complement things. So the level of restriction or level of species exemptions is effectively very few.
Keen to explore those questions more, Member Blair. The Councillor Patterson-Hamlin.
Kia ora. Excuse me. Are we able to go back to the map slide? Thank you. Just note that the only Gulf island that appears to be completely encompassed is Waiheke. I know there's the marine reserves and high protection areas covering bits of some of the other islands, but am I correct in understanding that according to this at the moment, the proposal, you could still go to Tiri or the eastern half of Kaua or whatever and do whatever you want? How does that work?
Yes, so as the those areas you've just identified are outside of the defined closed area, you would be able to go there and collect the reduced 10 limit per person of those all other category species, as well as your bag limit for the individual species that are identified. Now, what we've said in the submission is that there are potentially a couple of islands that are reasonably close inshore to the mainland that might have some accessibility in addition to Waiheke, and we're just suggesting that maybe there could be some further consideration of which islands are also part of the defined closed area. So we've mentioned Rangitoto and Kowal as two examples because there are ferry services to those islands. And now, having said that, the level of harvest activity that goes on in those places is very limited, but it is still a potential that we could probably include those now as opposed to wait. So we have highlighted that in the submission.
That's good. And I mean, I understand that it might be limited now, but as you say, there are ferry services. There's also a pretty high number of recreational vessels going to that area. And if these other areas are cut off as a potential, then you can imagine that, they're not as accessible, but they are still accessible. And so you can imagine that some of that activity might migrate out there. So yes, I'm glad that's in the submission.
Maybe just to note that a lot of the people who harvest these species of shellfish don't have vessels because they're not from sort of a wealthy background to own such assets. But it is possible, clearly, that there'll be some people who may have boats and they may go out and harvest those species. So your point's still valid. I think it's about saying what's the scale of potential activity that might happen. And I guess what we're trying to say in the submission is that could you just have another look at the likely areas that you want to include in the defined closed area to make sure that there's no other, reasonably close areas that should be included as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, just speaking a little further to Member Blair's very valid point about trying to make this as effective as possible, Dave. Obviously, one of the issues, no matter what we come up with, is ensuring a higher degree of compliance as possible. And in our submission, we make the statement that the Council requests that Fisheries New Zealand and Central Government commit to additional resourcing for the purpose of compliance, monitoring and enforcement in the Auckland region. That's perhaps a little hopeful, from our perspective, that they're going to actually do that. And in fact, all the experience to date has been, aside from, the occasional targeted raid, people get away with a lot of stuff, and we've certainly seen that up in the Hibiscus Coast. So, as far as ensuring a better compliance, then isn't it going to be advantageous to have as clear cut and as restrictive a prohibition as possible, so you take away all these people that are going to try it on, and especially when we're not going to be reliant, I think, on a pretty comprehensive enforcement system.
Yeah, look, compliance is clearly something we've identified in the submission that we need to focus on, and as you say, compliance staff in Fisheries New Zealand can redirect existing resources to particular topical issues. And I think the other comment to make is that there's already extensive recreational limits and in place for a whole range of different species of fish as well as shellfish. So it's quite a broad level of compliance expected of the people participating in this activity. I think the other thing is that the species that are exempted are readily identifiable species, so the oysters and the kinner, and so I don't think the same level of concern from a compliance perspective is there. You can distinguish between those sorts of harvesters versus the harvesters that might be more indiscriminate, would be my observation from experience within the fisheries compliance world.
So one of the issues that's emerged up in Whangapraoa, where we do have a full ban in place, is people have been using species like kinner to hide other species that they shouldn't have. So I guess what doesn't perhaps fully emerge from the huge growth in population, it's nearly doubled, but also within that population that's grown, we have different practices that were never foreseen back when this legislation was introduced, where it's effectively on almost a, you wouldn't call it a commercial scale, but it is almost semi-commercial in terms of the take that's been taken out and the practices that are being employed. So I guess that being the on-the-ground experience, I think that that points more to that need for a more kind of prohibitive regime. And I just want to check that I did my adding up. That was a message from the overwhelming majority of local boards too, wasn't it? Because I think 14 local boards wanted a clear message to support option 3, with only 4 going for 4. So that was a response from the people on the ground. The local boards have had experience with this thus far. Is that correct?
So I think there's a couple of observations to make there. One is that the concealment as a issue for compliance is something that's been around for a long time. It's not unusual, and so the fishery officers, when they are out doing enforcement patrols for whatever species, are aware of those sorts of issues and will tackle them appropriately. And they do undertake those inspections quite seriously when they do come across them. In terms of the feedback from local boards, yes, there was a strong sentiment for restriction, and those that indicated a particular option preference also highlighted in some cases some understanding about some of the exceptions that might be need to be entertained. So I think it's about looking at all of the different feedback and then looking at how we can present a clear picture for where that prohibition is landed, and making sure that there is no unintended consequences created.
Final question, Mr Chair, if you don't mind. Some of the local boards, I noticed, looking at their submissions, are referred back to the Act, and in particular sections 10 and 9, where if you're looking to maintain, biodiversity and species viability, that's in section 9, and that was conditional on good data. Now, I think that the data, let's be honest, has kind of struggled a bit to keep up with, what's actually happening on the ground. But if you put those two sections, 9 and 10, together in terms of, that requirement to maintain biodiversity, then obviously it's going to be as restrictive a regime as possible that's going to ensure that, especially in the absence of, data that may indicate that it's actually worse than what we think it is.
So I'm glad you asked that question, because I actually was a person who wrote the policy definition for the Section 9 environmental principles back in '97.
Oh, good.
And so I actually understand how it could be applied across the broad range of fisheries management decisions that are made across the country. The Fisheries New Zealand, when they put these proposals out, they go through a bit of a test. They test these sorts of statutory obligations, and they make sure that they're compliant with their own law. And so you could equally, if you were debating between one or other of the options, it's also useful to note that they tested all 4 options against those statutory obligations and came to the view that that was okay. Now, given that this is moving to a much more restrictive environment, regardless of how far you go, it's actually going in the right direction. And so I think in terms of the Section 8, Section 9 and Section 10 obligations, I will acknowledge that, yes, of course you would be great to have a lot more information and data to say what's happening with species X, Y and Z. But the reality is that that level of information may not be available for all species that are there. And so that's why sometimes we have these generic daily limits that are put in place to preserve species in some way. And so back in '93, we put in a 50 bag limit for these all other species, because we didn't have a lot of information, but we knew there was a concern. Now, here we are, some decades later, we're just pushing it back down again to 10. And that's actually a step in the right direction in terms of, making sure we are giving effect to the obligations under the first part of the Fisheries Act.
Thank you, Councillor. Member Wilson.
I'm just going to reference the MIS, and specifically para 55, that says that this has no direct Māori impacts associated with the Council's approval of the submission. And I beg to differ. What was it that was intended to reflect?
So the intent here was to make it clear that making a submission doesn't have an impact, but I guess the key point is that these controls are focused on recreational restrictions as opposed to any impact on customary Māori ability to harvest under customary provisions. Now, we also appreciate that they can do that under the amateur regulations as well, but this won't affect their ability to undertake those customary fishing activities.
Yeah, I guess it might be an internal musing. It is based on your experience. And so this, in a general sense, is the impact of Māori from Māori. So my second pātai is what, if any, engagement, reading through the report there, it's my understanding there was none. You have some legacy recollections of other type of legislation, but it's literally devoid of any sense, and right at the beginning it's got no direct impact. So how would that be that a submission that will include haukura members as part of the panel, how would that be that consultation or some form of view is garnered from mana whenua? Because it appears that that's not the case in this report.
Okay, so yes, I certainly went back and looked at all of some of my understanding of where particular iwi have been. Fisheries New Zealand, in their consideration of their proposals, had some initial socialisation with mana whenua through late 2025, so they had some engagement, but that wouldn't have been very widespread, I don't think. but so your point's still valid. We did notify all mana whenua groups on the 7th of May, the day this document came out, to indicate that there is the opportunity to liaise with us about any views that they wish to bring to our attention. I'm also very familiar with, obviously, a lot of the mana whenua views around the use of certain shellfish resources in certain places around the Auckland region, because I've been involved with a lot of the shellfish restrictions since 1990, where mana whenua have played a role. So I'm familiar with that. And in Para 57, I sort of make observations about their clear, perspectives in a general sense to see these resources looked after and to give an effect to that. So I suspect that once the submissions are made, that Fisheries New Zealand will check in probably again with mana whenua about what they're looking to propose to the Minister, would be my suggestion. One of the things we can suggest is that there's further engagement by Fisheries New Zealand with mana whenua about the proposals to help with that process.
Yes, it is indeed a brave person that seeks to give the views of mana whenua that aren't mana whenua. I make that observation absolutely as it relates to this item. If it's following the normal procedure that we use here, that we're used to utilising as members of Haukura, it is that there is some engagement, regardless if it's a fisheries submission or not, because the submission will be put through on behalf of Auckland Council with Haukura involved as well. So my pātai really is what is planned in terms of engagement once there's notification of this process by Auckland Council.
So I also just will mention that we do have our policy department, Hui, which we've been running over the last couple of months, and we have actually raised it, staff have raised it with individual mana whenua that this review is out or it's coming, and that there was another opportunity for them to contact us directly. That it wasn't necessarily availed, but we have made some attempt to ensure that mana whenua are aware of the proposals and that there is an opportunity to talk to us about what their views might be. I guess in terms of beyond the submission phase, we can certainly encourage for further dialogue between Fisheries New Zealand and also us and mana whenua if that's the recommendation.
Just more commentary later, Mr Chair, rather than toing and froing. My pātai have been asked. Thanks.
Kia ora, thank you, Mayor Wilson. Mayor Brown, and then Deputy Mayor afterwards.
Okay, I just want to make it quite clear that if what's proposed with the variation, option 3 would just stop everything. And but I think we've got to think. I want to make sure we can still harvest kina and oysters, but there is a gross oversupply of kina, and if we don't start harvesting it, there'll be no fish. And so stopping harvesting kina is not a wonderful, planet-saving, good idea. It's basically dumb, because the kina barrens out there, we need to harvest and eat a lot more kina. Similarly, oysters are everywhere in huge abundance, and banning the thing of oysters is just asking for people to break rules. So we need to make it abundantly clear that I will support whatever we have, but as long as kina and oysters are still able to be, they are not in short supply. Make that abundantly clear. And those of you that do go out there and have a look around will find that kina barrens are a very bad thing. And we are trying to actually reduce the kina out there. They're eating up and killing off everything else. So if you think that voting for a ban like some of those people is going to save the planet, then you're not on this one. Okay? Is that right, that what we will do here?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. We would be looking to include those as the exemption species if they have individual daily limits.
But to do that requires the amendment from the chair, is that right?
That's captured adequately by E.
Okay, that's good there. So people should understand it. Option 3 on its own is not a clever idea. Okay.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thanks. Boy, this isn't easy, is it? So can I just ask some questions for clarification? can you just tell me, this doesn't apply to commercial, so if you want any shellfish, you're basically buying commercial. Is that correct?
Yes, these proposals do not relate to the commercial sector. Bear in mind that the commercial sector may be prohibited in some way or shape or form from some of these areas anyway. The focus is on the recreational sector for these proposals.
So if you're after the likes of scallops, you only can get them commercially?
If you're after scallops, the only bed that's now will be open will be on the Manukau Harbour, because there's a 3-year closure. There's a closure in place on the Hauraki Gulf and the Kaipara. So Manukau is the only place that you would actually be able to look at getting scallops in season.
Yeah. My second question is, are you going for full closure? If we go for full closure, which is basically what the chair is saying here, is that potentially making it a little bit easier? Either it's hard to kind of, you're not half pregnant, it's sort of hard to know how many you can take and how many you can't. If you go for full closure, it's probably easier to understand. Would that be a fair comment?
The exemption species that are proposed are the species that already have daily limits. So your cockles, pippies, tuatua, your kina, your oysters, scallops, rock lobster. So those are already existing, and so as daily limits. So there should be no issue in terms of identifying existing rights to what you can take for those species.
And how long do you think we're going to have this ban to bring back the shellfish to an acceptable level where the public can have recreational recreational take, for want of a better word? How long do you think this should take for the shellfish species to regenerate? Yeah, that's a better way. Thank you.
So obviously some of these species have different life cycles and different recovery rates. The other key thing to note, of course, is the underlying environmental quality. And that's something we've been concerned about as council, is to make sure that the discharges to the coastal marine area are not adversely affecting the beds that are available there. And so one of the concerns here is that if those discharges were to continue, that it may stunt the recovery that could happen for some of these species, depending on if it's a hard shore versus a soft shore, depending on the catchment that sits behind that particular reef. If you're looking at strictly just a biological perspective, it could be several years before this kind of response would be positive.
And we're relying on central government to provide, central government only, to provide the fisheries officers. There's no obligation for us to fund staff to help police this.
There's no obligation per se for the council. The option for the council is to, and we have in the past, parks rangers have become honorary fishery officers. So in some places they've actually been able to offer the eyes and ears of the council to assist with local coastal park areas that are also known to be used for shellfish harvesting. So there is a possibility for us to play a role, and one of the things I haven't mentioned in the discussion is that there's things we can do from an education and campaign, awareness campaign point of view and communications that will work alongside Fisheries New Zealand. The other thing we do is that we actually have a monitoring series. We actually do a lot of research on reefs that's been started over recent years, and we can expand that to actually help Fisheries New Zealand with the information that may be necessary to help with management options.
My last question is, the 200 metres, defined closure areas of 200 metres from mean high. I mean, how are you going to explain that to the man on the street? On the beach.
So this is a good question, because the original reason for the 200 metres related to some concerns about some level of shore-based intertidal activity that would happen within the shallow subtidal, and there was and this is on next to reefs, rocky environments, and so to try and ensure that all of the collection activities were encompassed by that, so you knew that you were in the area. It was given a 200 metre distance offshore, and this was for the temporary closure up in Army Bay, Whangaparoa, etc. And that's been the model that's been applied here in terms of the distance offshore. That distance offshore is not an appropriate distance offshore if you were trying to manage soft shore species like tuatua cockle. So it really just indicates that the design of the proposal was really around hard shores, and that's why the exceptions are actually important, because you don't want to capture those soft shore species in this hard shore approach.
And lastly, sorry, what's the stick here? What's the fine?
So the infringement offences is if you collect in excess up to 2 times the daily limit, it's a $250 fine. If you collect over 2 times the daily limit but less than 3 times the daily limit, it's $500 fine. If you exceed if you exceed 3 times the limit, well then you're off to court, and that's where more significant penalties can take place. There is an option for fisher officers to seize equipment used in any illegal harvesting, and that can be basically forfeited to the Crown. So there's a couple of other things for more significant offences.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Turner.
Thank you very much. So supporting the Deputy Mayor and Member Blair, total closure is the simplest way, isn't it?
So again, it comes back to the problem definition of what you're trying to achieve, and so just to be clear, is the problem definition here is largely around trying to solve an issue that's prevalent on the hard shore, not the soft shore, and so the measures as such go a long way to do that. And if you've got some level of exception for some small number of species, then that's still manageable in terms of how that's complied with.
I went to a meeting about rock pools, and there was a whole bunch of information given to us, but there was a section in there, I think, with all due respect, I think you're wrong. It was talking about total closure, and it was for the soft areas as well as the hard areas. Like, the point I'm trying to make is, you said, what are we trying to fix? We're trying to fix the issue plus the complication. So, like, I'm correct, there's only 19 officers across the Auckland region, correct? Or is it?
That would be about right. That's full-time compliance staff as opposed to the honorary fishery officer network.
And when you said that rangers can do it, so the rangers years ago were all given honorary fishery licences, and they all turned them in around the Manukau area, the north side of the Manukau area, because it became the most confrontational part of the job, and it also came with a lot of understanding that they didn't have, partly because of the complexity, thinking back about 20 years when I can remember this. So again, wouldn't it be just simpler for us? I understand the Mayor's talk about kina barons, but they're not on the Manukau that I know of. I haven't seen them, so I'm trying to make it workable, and certainly the public are telling me that it's option 3 they want, and option 3, their understanding is that it's total closure.
I think if you look at the range of species that would be potentially available as an exception species that might still be taken on the west coast there, it might be things like oysters, which we know is a problem in terms of blocking channels and in the Manukau Harbour, for example. So the range of exceptions, so to speak, in the Waitakere area would be very limited. So I don't think there's an issue with sort of making this not workable per se.
I did have feedback from some of the rock pool people in West Auckland that won't have seen these amendments, and they were very, as part of those 14 boards. It would be, and as you just said before, decades ago you did a limit reduction. The recreational take hasn't reduced for years, has it? There's been no change to those take limits for ever.
Not for the all others category, but there has been a reduction in 98 and 99 for the more commonly taken shellfish. So your pippies, cockles, tuatua, mussels, they have been reduced in 98. And so since that time, since 1993 for the all other categories, there has not been a change.
Are these exceptions for limited number of exceptions for taking? Is that for cultural reasons for mana whenua? Is it only?
No, it's not. It's just for recreational use. These proposals don't relate to customary fishing.
See, because I see on your map up there, there's a little orange, purple spot on the coast above the Manukau Harbour, which I think is Kerikeri Beach, which has had a rahui on it since 1998, correct?
There's over a dozen different places around the Auckland area that have temporary closures or permanent regulatory responses. One of the things I highlighted is that there's been such a range of these things that this is the opportunity to actually have a consistent approach across, perhaps a broader geographic area. It doesn't mean that you deny the particular tool that you have in place at the moment. Like, you can still continue with that regulation. But it's just saying that this is about trying to have a broader based set of measures across the entire Auckland Coromandel region. But yes, there is a dozen odd areas that have these sorts of particular local restrictions.
So last question, although I might have more after others. So based on this and your comment about that you were involved in setting this decades ago and now we're not at a good place, do you not consider that just closure for a period to reassess wouldn't be the most practical way of approaching it? Total closure.
So I think we are getting there in terms of what's proposed, because we're basically saying that 95% of the species would be closed. There's just a few species that actually would be exempted because they're actually relatively abundant, or that they have, they're not found in the same environment as the hardshell species. So effectively, you would have a prohibition across the areas of concern, the hardshells.
I might have some more questions after if anyone else prompts me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sayers.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Dave, would it be so the species that are being exempt? I've got kina, oysters. What else is being exempt?
So we've said that the species that have existing species-specific limits. So if you could reel them off. And again, I'm reeling off both the soft shore and hardshell species. So you've got your kina, your oysters, you've got the rock lobster, scallops, pawa, and then you've got cockles, pippies, tuatua. One that's not included as an exemption species is mussels. And that's because we think that we need to, in Fisheries New Zealand, and a number of people have said, no, we don't need to have an exemption for mussels, we want to see that recover. So and then you've got to think about the fact that there is a number of complementary measures that are already in place that close access to rock lobster. Pawa's got a minimum size limit, which means it's effectively not able to be harvested. Scallops is a fishery closure in place, except for the Manukau. So a lot of these issues are already solved through other more bespoke, tailored measures. The species that are in the exemption list or exception list that may not have those particular additional measures or things and are found on the hard shore are basically kina and oysters.
Okay, so I just want to get this right. So does option 3, are we saying a full intertidal closure in the defined Auckland regional closure area, prohibiting recreational harvesting of shellfish and other intertidal invertebrates, excluding the list that you've just set up? Would that be accurate?
Yes, I have said in the report that there are two other what we call shellfish species under the Fisheries Act that were included, squid and shrimps. Squid is a pelagic species that is fished off wharfs. It's not associated with hard shore as like a sessile organism, but obviously people are collecting it by jigging off the wharfs at various localities around the place.
Okay.
Shrimps is found also in not only on the hard shore but also in estuaries, so there is some level of harvest for that species. So that's the only other two that, and they've got newly proposed bag limits in this through this process. Is it only two, and no one's raising any concerns about squid fishing or so it's not a problem to include those particular species.
And is it accurate to say outside the closure areas, a combined daily limit of 10 shellfish per species that do not already have their own specific daily limit? Is that accurate?
Yes, so outside of the defined closed area, you may take 10 of the all others category of shellfish.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Can I ask you, just because Muriwai Beach sits right at the top of that squiggly line there, can you just confirm with me what the change is going to be for the rock pool environment? Because there's quite a lot of community concern around the rock pool environment at Muriwai.
So it'll be largely prohibited that you won't be able to take shellfish in that Muriwai area, and apart from those exception species. Now, the question is which of those exception species might exist in that area, and it'll be very few.
Yeah, okay, understood. And finally, in terms of decision-making dates, do we know when the final decision gets made? And is that? Can you just clarify that perhaps the expected timeline and who makes that? Is it New Zealand Fisheries, the minister? Who makes that final call?
Yes, it's a ministerial decision. It's a gazette notice, so it's not going to go to cabinet. And so, or they may take the option of informing cabinet, but the point is that it's a ministerial decision. It's a gazette notice. The intention is to get this in place around about September, election coming, so they want to get this in place as fast as possible. And the gazette notice tool actually provides for some efficiency in getting that done.
Very good, thank you. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Gillen.
Thank you. I've got a question along similar lines because I'm concerned about the exceptions. I support the option 3 the Chair is putting forward. But with the exceptions, what you've listed off seems to be similar to the exceptions that would be under option 2 that MPI put out. Would that be right? I've got the official thing here. It's got a list of them. But they're the exceptions we're talking about.
So option 2 and 4 both have an exception list, which are quite similar. But what we've said in the case of if you look at the species in option 4, they're proposing another 5 species or species groups. We've said no, we only want to have shrimps and squid in addition to the ones that we've just highlighted before.
Okay, it's just difficult because the submission we've got in front of us is for 4, but if we change it to 3, then so you're proposing that the exceptions that you've then listed in the submission would transfer over to 3 under the Chair's recommendation?
Yes, there's not a lot in it in terms of they're actually similar, and I guess what the intent here is to ensure that we are sending a very clear message about prohibition, but at the same time looking for some practical, pragmatic sort of exemptions where appropriate. And so there's a few species that are in that camp.
So apart from kina that we've heard about, that there are problem areas where there's too many of them, why would we have exceptions in the intertidal area when it would be much easier to enforce if it was just a blanket ban of everything? I mean, you've mentioned how there's already existing limits on some of those species, but MPI were proposing in option 3 themselves for a blanket ban, so it must be possible for us to have that blanket ban under our option 3. Why even bother with the exceptions unless we want to specify something like, kina in this location, but everywhere else, just a blanket ban?
So firstly, it's about understanding what the problem definition is trying to solve, which is one issue is that's focused on hard shore species. It's sort of captured the soft shore species and going through that process. and that's stated in the document from Fisheries New Zealand. The exceptions proposed are reasonable species that actually are easily identifiable and able to be harvested. They are not necessarily the kinds of species like whelks, whelks and chitons, etc., that are actually found on your reef environments, apart from your kina and the oysters, basically. So those are easily identifiable species in terms of a targeted fishery. They're not sort of indiscriminate species that can be taken.
Okay. I guess we'll leave that one up to debate. My last question is, do you actually have time to do a submission for us on option 3 if that passes? Because the cut-off date is Friday, I understand.
Yes, so you've got a draft submission in front of you, and it wouldn't take much to amend that to give effect to the committee's decision. And again, it's just sort of trying to emphasise the thrust of the committee's perspective, if we look at the resolutions shortly, to have that sort of drive towards more restrictions, and just to say, well, these are the exemptions that may be more even narrow than what we have. So, I mean, there's an option there to tweak the submission, as it were, to get to our place by Friday, that we'll have that sorted out. I think by and large, if you look at the submission, it covers it off pretty well in terms of the kinds of issues that we were raising in terms of the discussion already. I think it's just a case of the tweaks and some of the language and just making sure we've reflected the level of support for that direction that this committee wishes to take.
Okay, thank you.
It's just a question from me. On the, you know how all options include the up to 10 shellfish without a species specific limit, so crabs, limpet, starfish, etc. Couldn't we just, I know that's under all options in the paper, but wouldn't it be easier just to at least remove that completely? Have no take for crabs and starfish, etc., like under any circumstances? Wouldn't that be an easy move forward? So then at least it was only,
So the intent here is the distinction between those accessible parts of the coast, which are basically on the mainland, versus those parts of the coast which are more inaccessible, where Fisheries New Zealand would like to still enable some level of harvest. And so what they're trying to do is say the purpose of the Act for them is about providing for use while ensuring sustainability, reducing from 50 down to 10 per person for those all other category species certainly achieves ensuring sustainability part of the argument, but it's still providing for some level of use in some of those offshore areas, basically within the Auckland Coromandel area.
So the Hibiscus Coast, the Ngāti Manuhiri proposal, the concerns was those species. How does a fisheries officer know when they're in the car park of the beach that came from the deeper water or the shore, if it's starfish and crab? Wouldn't it be easier if we, even though it's in all options, if we just said you can't collect any of those other species like crabs and starfish?
So a lot of those species are associated with the shore, so therefore, understanding that they were taken from that 200 metres, within 200 metres of the shore is possible. So I think there's not too many issues there. There are, and again, some of these people are seen collecting and or at car parks. It sort of is kind of obvious.
I'll wait for the questions, but I'll see if I'm happy to put that in, because I know that's been a big concern. I think that would help us be clearer, so you're not having a gamble of I only took 10 starfish instead of it's just you can only take no starfish. That might help, even though it's under every option. But anyway, Councillor Fletcher.
I guess it's sort of following on in a way. Can I say that this is a really good moment? I'm sure Roger Grace, the late Roger Grace, who was a great hero of mine, would be very happy we're spending time debating it. But few staff in Auckland Council have your deep institutional and historic knowledge of these issues. And I think back to my early foray into trying to get public acceptance of change. It was with Dennis Marshall and trying to get closure around the Hahei Marine Reserve and just how hard that was. So I'm calling on your skills, expertise, and understanding of implementation, because we can all be activists for what we want, but it has to work. Do you feel that we've got the balance right with this in terms of public understanding and acceptance, but implementation, given all of the challenges and obstacles? I'll put that in a rather clumsy way, but I really do want to understand that you have an opportunity to speak to that freely. I know you've been under a huge amount of pressure to get this work here, but is there anything that we have overlooked or that we have not, we don't know what we don't know, that we haven't asked of you? Is there something you'd like to add to this to help us ensure we are acting in the right way?
I think I would note that we've been advocating for this review for a couple of years, and the first comment I'd make, and this falls out of the advocacy following on from Sea Change and Revitalising Our Gulf, and so we've been trying to get this on the operational work program for Fisheries New Zealand. We've done that. We were very strong in terms of our desire to see further restrictions. The exact shape of these restrictions were unknown until obviously recently, and what I can see through the proposals is that these are workable proposals. They do target the hard shore if they're applied correctly, and that a broader based Auckland Coromandel area reduction from 50 down to 10 per person is definitely is going to reduce the risk of excessive take while providing some opportunity for use. From a compliance perspective, yes, it will always be a challenge whenever you change any fisheries rule, and I've been through many of these exercises, that there's a period of transition. The other comment I'd make is that whenever we do these things, and in fact we should advocate for this in the submission, if I haven't done it already, is we should say that you need to come back and review this in 3 years to see how well this has gone. And so, sorry, I think I did include that in the submission. It's just that was last week. But the point I just wanted to make is that what I see as one of the challenges with any of these changes is that if they're not adequately reviewed over time, then you get a lot of the polarisation within the community, which is completely understandable. And so it is important to ensure that you have got a reasonable level of comfort that they are going to be reviewed and tweak it even further if need be. So I don't think this is something that's finished. I think this will be something that we'll be looking to do in 3 years' time. We should probably look at have a bit more of a review. I think the only thing I'd also say is relevant to your question is that over the last 30 years, we've seen a lot of patchwork of different kinds of closures, sometimes for a species, sometimes for a mix of species, sometimes for every species, across a range of different geographies. Some of them are local embayments, some of them are whole fish stocks, some of them are harbours. And what we're trying to do with this is use the benefit of the existing regulated area for Auckland Coromandel to get a broad-based common understanding to some fundamental new settings. Now, if those settings aren't quite right, 3 years from now we can have another go at it. I think this is moving us into a much better place than what we have currently. Now, I appreciate that there are some who will be arguing that there's maybe we need to go further. And I think this is about understanding, I think, whether or not the exceptions are reasonable species to actually enable some level of ongoing use. And I think for the species that have been identified, they're okay. And they're not, when I give you a list of 10 species, half of them have probably already got other complementary measures in place, and it's only if they're only found in a few places where you'd probably want to harvest them. So kina and oysters are the two most obvious in terms of ones that don't have additional restrictions that need attention.
We'll make sure there's a review clause in the submission. I don't think we need to put it in recommendations, but Dave, and we'll make sure there's a review in the full submission.
I don't now need to speak But I really would like to record my sincere gratitude to Dave. I know he's been under immense pressure, and I've put him under further pressure for a pre-meeting for the Hauraki Golf Forum members tomorrow, but I also know that he hasn't had either breakfast or lunch today, and he's been working around the clock. So I just want to say thank you very much, Dave, on behalf of all of us.
Thank you. Councillor Lee. Got Councillor Lee, Member Blair, then Councillor Turner, and we'll try and...
Thank you.
finish.
A number of questions. I understand that this initiative has come to a large degree in response to concerns about the impacts of harvesting the hard shore, especially in the Hibiscus Coast, Rodney district. Would that be fair to say?
Probably wider, actually, I think. Yeah, but I mean, obviously that's the most recent one. But yeah.
As you know, the Hauraki Golf Forum had a presentation from a local resident, very forceful one, about this problem a couple of years ago, or was last year actually, early last year. So it was a hard shore which was being completely stripped, if you will, and not for recreational purposes. Clearly, it was for commercial purposes, but there's a reference here to recreational take from the hard shore. I think it was a bit more financially motivated than recreation. Yet we are also closing off the soft shore as well, equally. Is that how it works?
Sorry, we're closing off what?
The restrictions also apply to the soft shore as well as the hard shore?
Yes, so as proposed, if you were to go for a full prohibition, it would close the soft shore, and what we're trying to say is, no, that's not quite what we want. There are some species there, like Coles, pippies, tuatua, that we would probably want to see exempted in terms of not having those restrictions, because there's controls in place for those species.
So just to get, you've gone for option. You've said that all of the options are similar, but they are indeed different. That's why they're separate. But you've actually argued for option 4, but the recommendation from the chair, and I see most of the local boards, probably all of them, is for option 3. Does option 3 mean a complete ban of soft shore take, apart from pest species? Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. In terms of the legalities, and you're the expert here, there's a lot of species or taxa that are not actually shellfish. Is there a legal issue about calling something a shellfish and a defendant saying, well, what I'm taking is not shellfish, it's crustacea or whatever? Do we need to be a bit more precise about what the ban applies to, rather than calling everything shellfish? Because some of them are not shellfish.
Yeah, and look, shellfish is legally defined in the Fisheries Act, and it actually lists the taxa that it actually applies to, so it is actually clear legally. And I think what we, and one of the paragraphs I've got in the report talks to the fact is to, that's why shellfish can include things that are not the typical things you would say are shellfish. Things like chitons and whelks are included. Starfish, they're included as shellfish.
Algae.
No, but
that's been stripped as well.
No, but that's So there is phyla that are included in the definition of shellfish, and that is clear, and it's obviously important to make sure that in any campaign that is used, that people understand what shellfish means.
Okay. And we're dealing with the fisheries, Auckland Coromandel district, Auckland Coromandel area, which you're well familiar with. We can't speak for Coromandel, but so are we aligned have we consulted with the Waikato Regional Council?
So I've talked to the staff in Waikato Regional Council, and they were indicating that they were looking at option 4 as a recommendation to the committee.
So they're looking for option 4, and we're going, now, we were, but now we're going for option 3.
Yes, although what we've said in the Chair's Recs is that we're going for option 3 with exemptions, or exceptions, so that is kind of aligned to...
So we can make option 3 more like option 4, as it were?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. In terms of how long this lasts, it's not clear. I think it would be helpful for the public that we define the period that this ban, if you like, applies for. But do you not think that's wise?
So the Fisheries New Zealand haven't said anything in their proposals as to putting a time limit on this particular review, of the measures. So it effectively would be a permanent regulatory change, yes. And so this is goes to the point about this being a fundamental setting, subject to a review that might happen. But even if you did a review, it's not like you come to the end of 3 years and a thing expires. It actually stays in place. And it's only if you actually make an active change.
Okay. So the review is not to say, look, there seems to be no impact. The soft shore communities, shellfish, have recovered very well indeed, and therefore we can amend or even lift the ban. So that's not a possibility. The review is just a review, as it were.
Well, any review could lead to a recommendation to the minister in charge of these provisions to change the law again.
Yeah.
What we're trying to signal is that we want something a bit more permanent, and obviously if it's not working, well then a review would hopefully identify things that we could change.
How do we know? Have we got baseline data that say this is it, and therefore in 5 years' time or 3 years' time we can measure? Have we got that information?
We have some limited information, yes, and I think
is that sufficient?
We've indicated, and Fisheries New Zealand have also indicated that they're looking to work with the councils to help further increase their monitoring resources.
Yeah, would that be helpful to do that work before you implement the ban?
No, we probably have to wait too long. I think the point is that we've got enough information to say that we can move on these restrictions, but it's probably more a case of what additional information would you get in the next 3 years that would be better to apply those learnings.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And just before I go to Member Blair, it's not on the screen yet, but I've checked with Councillor Short and she's happy to have a total ban on any other shellfish, so crabs, periwinkles, limpets, starfish, whelks, shrimp, sea cucumber, squid, octopus. I know it's in all options that you can pick up to 10, but I think that's been where most of the concern has been coming from, and I think it's important to point that out. The Member Blair.
Thank you. I think I'm almost there then, off the back of that, because I'm saying, who takes a starfish home? So, yeah, I grew up harvesting at Maukatia, otherwise known as Māori Bay, Parihoa, Kaipara Harbour, and at Mihido, Windahome, which is our traditional Ngāti Rango grounds. Yeah, we never took periwinkle, we never took limpets, starfish, whelks, shrimps, and the like. So, I think what this has shown to me is that it's not simple, and I think we do need to make it simple and have a complete ban, except for the obvious pragmatic ones of the exotic oyster and the kina. But everything else, I think it just needs to recover. In 2007, we conducted a survey of shellfish at Ōkahu Bay. We counted 40 sexually mature pipi. 40. So this would allow all 40 to be taken legally, right? And there'd be nothing left with a legal limit of 50. So yeah,
I think we just need a complete ban except for the obvious exotic oysters and kina. Make it very clear, and it'll be open again when it's healthy, not when Ministry of Fisheries believe it's sustainable.
Kia ora, Member Blair. Look, I know that that's not the advice, but, and I haven't talked to Councillor Short, and I know trying to speed things up and not do amendments all over the place, but I'm happy to put that in, but we'll vote on it separately. So I know some people might not like that, but that's kind of the vibe I was going for, but I know it's not the advice because of the balance between commercial fisheries will still be going on, and we are, so I think it's worth, I will work with the team again, but essentially it will look like limited number of say there was after the E, the limited number of exceptions would only include oyster and kina. But I will take it separately because that is quite different to what's proposed, but I know that's what some of you would like, but I also know that that is not what some people support. So is that what you would support, Member Blair? So it's just making clear that essentially the only exceptions are the kina and the oyster. Yep. But I want it because that's not the advice, and I know. But yeah. Yeah. So that would be. Yeah. So that's what I said. That they would be our only exception. Yeah, that's what I just said. Yeah. But. Yes, absolutely. So the review will be part of that. But remember, we're not the decision maker. We're just giving feedback. But I think it's clear. Well, I feel the vibe is clear that is where people want to go. I know that is against advice, but if we put that up, I'll keep it separate so then people don't feel like they have to vote against the substantive and the. But I don't want to do amendments, and we all have to go through 2 debates on this. If that's all right. Cool. Councillor Turner, you have more questions?
Please, thank you. I'll be quick. You should have had breakfast. It gives you the stamina for total closure. Just, you talk about, all of us received a big email this morning, like a huge email from the Piha Rockpool people that I visited the other day. And a couple of things. You talk about problem definition, but that's kind of your construct, is it not? Because actually, I've been trying to catch up on it here while we were talking, there is several points of rationale in there for why it's being closed. It's 27, I think, points of rationale on why we're closing it, or why close you would. And then the other thing, at the very end of the email, there's a table, and the table that they provided, and they've put heaps of work into this, they provided a comparison between Regulation 60 and Section 11 closure, because the Section 11 closure, which I understand from this, is actually the closure we're talking about, is it not? We're talking about a Section 11 closure in that document, which comes with heavier penalties and all sorts of stuff. Am I right?
Section 11 of the Fisheries Act is about sustainability measures, and it's given effect through Section 297 in terms of the regulation-making power. The penalties that would still apply would probably still be the infringement notice offence penalty regime that I mentioned earlier. The thing about a Section 11 measure for sustainability is that you can have different timeframes inputted, or you could have it as a permanent regulation. Typically, it's a permanent regulation. So, yeah, I think that answers one of your points.
I don't know if I'm asking the question entirely right, because last question, very small one. My dear old dad used to say, easier to start hard and get softer than the other way around. Was he right?
Well, we're certainly getting a long way there, and I think I want to emphasise the shift from what we have now to what's proposed here. It is actually a significant shift, and I think that's all we're really debating is sort of some of the exception species and where they might be in terms of around the region. But I think the intent here is definitely going towards, moving towards a level of prohibition. But basically, there's just a couple of species, or not a couple, but a few species of it I've talked about, which would be appropriately exempted. And some of those already have other management measures in place. So your rock lobster has a closure in place, your scallops have closures in place, your paua have minimum legal size, and then it comes down to the soft shore species like pippies, cockles, tuatua. Again, not things you find on the the hard shores. So in terms of the Waitakere areas, the hard shore species there are mostly covered. So in terms of being prohibited.
I won't go any further. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're just going to take a brief break to sort out, because I don't want to confuse people, and I especially don't want to put the staff under pressure to get this right. So we're just going to take a 5-minute break, get these points clear, and make sure everyone feels comfortable in the way we're voting. Thanks. Just cleaning up the wording there. And I'll just get, Dave, if you want to step back from the table, because I think we've stopped the questions. Cool. So just to be clear, that is where we kind of got to with the conversation. F is actually stronger than option 3 was, because it removes any other species completely to make it clearer. And we've been clear that we're exempting kina and oysters. Yeah, thank you. So there were no other questions, so we'll move to debate. So I think we're good. Thank you very much, Dave. I know it's highly complex work. Now, do we need debate, or are we happy to? Okay, cool. There's no list, but happy to speak. Councillor Watson, and then Councillor Gillen, and then Councillor Watson. Just want to indicate online if you want to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for that change up there. I'm very happy with that. What is happening on our coastline at the moment is completely unacceptable. I remember when sea anemones, starfish, crabs in local rock pools along the North Shore coastline, and it wasn't that long ago. And I'm told that there was much more of it before my time, but it's now virtually all gone. And while past harvesting, sediment from developments and sewage spills have had their toll, what we're seeing now is a wholesale removal of all the remaining sea life, and it must be stopped. In some cases, hundreds of people are descending on beaches and filling buckets. Harvesting sessions and locations are advertised online, tour buses are turning up, rock pools are being stripped of all animal and plant sea life, chisels are being used, piano wire is being used, until nothing is left. People are even doing this in the middle of the night under torchlight. There is also some evidence that sea life that is being collected is being sold on the black market. This is not sustainable. Local prohibition doesn't work because it just shifts the problem to the next bay. We need full protection of our coastline. I attended a public meeting last night in Milford, one of several across Auckland, filled with concerned local residents. It was very clear that maximum protection is wanted and needed. I want to acknowledge one of those speakers, Mark Lenton from Whangaparoa, who, through his hard work over a period of 18 months, helped to raise this as a significant issue for Auckland beaches. And I was at the event earlier in the year with Councillor Sayers, Councillor Watson, and Hibiscus and Bay's Chair Alexis Poppelbaum that helped put community pressure on the government to look at changes. And I'd also like to acknowledge Ngāti Manahiri, who formally applied for a temporary closure that is now in effect, although it is only for Whangaparoa. We're now at the point where we need a full closure around the Auckland coastline. What we actually need is a 10-year moratorium to help the rock pool life recover. That isn't one of the options in front of us, though. The option with the most protection is option 3. It is also the easiest to understand and the easiest to enforce. And so I'd like to acknowledge the local boards who have provided substantial feedback on this topic, with 2/3 supporting option 3. And in the north, the Devonport Takapuna Local Board, the Kaipariki Local Board, the Upper Harbour Local Board, the Hibiscus and Bays Local Board, and the Rodney Local Board all support option 3. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will be supporting what you have up there. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Chair, and just following on from Councillor Gillen, yeah, certainly support the direction there, and thank you for your initiative in that. Obviously, as we're told in the report, you know, our population is nearly doubled between 1985 and 25, and within that doubling of the population, we also have other trends that have emerged in terms of harvesting the sea life basically on a kind of industrial scale. Now, that's totally different from anything that was anticipated back in the 80s, and it really is, and it's had its effect. So that's why there's been such an overwhelming response around Auckland. People might be willing to take all sorts of impositions, but certainly this issue has really struck a chord amongst people east, west, north, or south. So it's been driven by the community and has got overwhelming support. For it to work well, then it needs clarity, and we mentioned the difficulties with compliance, and I would just say for some of the people that perhaps not familiar with what happened up in Whangapaereira, there actually is a ban in place. Thank you very much to Ngāti Manahiri and our locals like Mark Lenton and the local board. But even with that and with all the publicity, there's still a lot of illegal activity that's been taking place. So there's people going out late at night and first thing in the morning, they're still trying to get away, people walking around with suitcases full of stuff from the rock pools. So even with that, they're still trying to pull it off. And in some of these areas, you know, we're not talking about 10, 20, we're talking about hundreds of people, literally hundreds of people that are all coming out at the same time, day after day. They're actually organised trips. So that's the level of what we're dealing with. So anything that simplifies the enforcement and simplifies the message, then there's obviously a lot to be said for that. I would just say in passing the planetary remarks about what planet people are on as far as kina goes. Hand harvesting of kina might have a relatively small localised effect, but it does very, very little to, if anything, to address the kina barons, and certainly the research by Auckland University has been quite adamant that simply having people collect a few kina for food does not remove enough to make a noticeable difference at the scale of a kina baron. So that's a scientific fact. But on this kind of challenge that we've got before us, we've made, I think, substantial movements, and I think certainly that's going to be a good outcome for all our communities, no matter where they are in the years to come. And it'd be good to have the kind of review and monitoring to see what's happening on the ground, because thus far that's been lacking. But this is certainly a very good start, and I think it'll be greatly supported by people right across Auckland.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really kind of a question on F, which is new there. The total ban on harvest of species in the any other shellfish category without a species-specific limit. So that means no to those things, does it?
Yes.
Yeah, good. No, thank you. I support this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, so I'm going to take, I think, A to D. All those in favour? Any opposed? Then E. All those in favour? Any opposed? And F and whatever was after F. I know what was after F, but I can't remember if there was more than one. Sorry. F and G. Sorry. F and G. What sounds? All those in favour? Any opposed? Oh, cool. That was easier than I thought. Thank you. I think it's that is passed. Thank you. Right. We will just take I think we can move straight on, at least to questions, and we could probably have a break after questions. We will move on.